Today I'm going to talk about painting the light in the scene and specifically how to create dappled shadows. Let's take a look. As I always do, I lay out my drawing for the painting first. And in the first wash of my painting, we are going to think about the lightest values of the scene. What are the colors of all the areas that are in light in the scene? That's specifically what I'm thinking about in the first wash of the painting. So I lay out my drawing, and as I typically do, I wet down the front of the paper and the back of the paper for this nice wet and wet wash. And I'm going to start with the sky. And I'm using some Cerulean and some Cobalt Blue. And now I'm moving right into the color of the trees. So I'm adding this warm green color. This is Cobalt Turquoise with some raw sienna and some cadmium yellow. That's how I get this nice vibrant green color. And the reason why I'm laying this in now is because I want some of those trees to be really soft and just kind of fade into the distance. And that's why I wanted to drop those in while the sky wash is still wet and while the paper is still damp. So I'm moving my way down. I've laid in some green in this area for these soft trees in the distance. And now we're going to think about the light that's down here and the light that is on our main building in this scene. I'm painting the color of the building that is in light. That's what I'm thinking about right now. And I noticed that I went maybe a little too dark on the front of the building where the light is going to be hitting it. So I'm using my brush and I'm just going to lift a little bit of that off. And that's what's nice about this first wash that we are painting is because the paper is damp, we have time to move a little bit more deliberately because things aren't drying too fast, we're not getting hard edges. And so I can make these adjustments on the fly while the paper is damp. I don't have to worry about getting a hard edge here. I can just let it sit until I come back to this area of the scene. And there are some of these support beams of this barn that I wanted to drop in now, the little bit of wood color. And the thing about this first wash is we're leaving everything very abstract, very, very light. All the definition, all the details, all of that is going to come later in the scene. But this wash is so important for laying the foundation of the light in the scene. Leaving a little bit of warmth there for some parts of the tree. And you'll notice here, I'm adding some skin tone and some colors for the fabric of their clothing. And I want that to fuzz right into this first wash. And that does take some getting used to for people. They don't like colors fading from one to another. And I understand, but when you look at a scene in real life, you can see that light and color, they bounce and reflect. And I think that this way of painting can help suggest that. There's a bright bush here that is catching the light, and I'm gonna paint around that because it's the brightest part of the scene and I want to have that contrast. So I did dampen the whole paper, but things are dry enough that I can paint around an area and get a harder edge if I want to. Now I'm getting into the warmer colors that are on this stone wall. And that is some raw sienna for the warmer areas and some raw sienna with some lavender for the cooler areas. And I'm laying in some warm tone for these trees. This tree is a nice vertical over to the left of the painting. And I want to lay some of that in now in case I want to leave some of that color and really show the light that's hitting that tree. And now I need some more vibrant green down here for the grass because I really want to show that light shining on that grass and I don't want to go too weak. For this richer green, I'm using more cadmium yellow and cobalt turquoise. That is a good vibrant mixture that I like, especially for grass that is in light. When I need that really nice pop of green, that's the mixture that I'm using. So I'm bringing that down, and now it's time to paint the areas of the road down here and over to the right of the painting as well. And there's some coolness on the road. It's reflecting a little bit of that coolness that's in the sky, and I'll mix in some cool and warm right on the paper. And the temptation is to go really weak in the first wash. See how strong I went here? I know that this is going to be in shade, and I'm going to go over this one more time, but I'm really in this wash still. I know that the brightest part of the painting is going to be around here, so as I get away from that bright part of the painting, I can strengthen up my wash to really emphasize that area of light. All right, so let's talk about these dappled shadows. Now, there are a lot of dappled shadows on the path here, and I'm not going to try to put a whole bunch of them and make it really take over the painting. But while this paper is still damp, I thought I'm going to lift off some areas And so I'm thinking about areas where I really want the light to be important and get those dappled shadows in. And I'm taking a damp brush and I'm pushing firmly down on the paper and I'm lifting off to get a little bit lighter of an area where I want that soft shadow to be. And I will be painting over all this in the foreground again, but this right here tells me where I want the dappled light to be. So when I paint the next wash, I can paint around those areas as well. And right here is a look at the first wash of the painting. I'm at the stage now where I'm going to let everything dry and then we'll come back in and move into the next phase. All right, my paper has dried and now we're going to move into the middle values and we're going to keep pushing. So I've mixed up a large puddle of green and more cadmium yellow, more cobalt turquoise, and some raw sienna. And I'm going to start at the left of the painting and try to keep working from a wet edge. And this is the challenging time when we're really trying to squint and we're really trying to see connections. And every time I'm reloading my brush, I try to come back to a wet edge, unless there's a little branch or something I'm painting around and deliberately leaving behind. Whenever I come back to the paper, I try to go to a wet edge and keep that connected shape moving around the scene. So we're starting here and we're painting some trees in the background. I'm painting around some of these trees. So I'm working my way around, and I like using this calligraphy brush, especially when it comes to painting trees and loose freeform objects. And I like it because it can hold a lot of water, but I can also use the side of it and get some nice broken dry brush marks. So I'm working my way around the scene, continuing with those greens, avoiding some of those lighter values that I painted in the first wash. See those bits of brown I left for the trees here? I wanted to give myself a chance to leave some of those light areas behind and see if it works. So now I realize I need to get into the middle values and darks of this barn because there are little bits of it that I want to connect into the tree shape of the background. So I'm taking my time. There are some posts that I need to paint around, negatively paint. It looks very dark right now, but it'll look better once I get the rest of the values in. So I found a natural stopping point here. I want to leave that vague and unfinished in the background. And now I'm going to start working on the shadow shape on the barn and connecting all of that. So for the shadow, I'm using some cobalt blue, some lavender, a little bit of neutral tint. Still trying to connect. I pulled the shadow across the road here, and now I'm connecting into the trees on the other side of these figures. And I came up to here. I had a fully loaded brush, and I wanted to use it for the top of this tree. And I'm pulling this down here, and I'm going to connect this right into the shadow. And remember, I wanted to strengthen this even more, and it looks very strong right now, but once we get our other values in over on this side of the painting, I think it's going to work out fine. One thing I did before I move into this sweeping shadow across the road, where we get into these dappled shadows, is I put a little mist of spray on the paper. I'm kind of covering up the top of my paper, and I'm misting the road. And sometimes I like to do this when I want some softer edges, because the painting overall is dry, but by misting the bottom of that paper, I can get some softer edges into my shadow. And again, the shadow color I'm using here is some cobalt blue, some lavender, and some neutral tint. And I'm looking at the connection of the shadows, and I want to pull it in and connect it into this while this is still damp. And I'm still using my calligraphy brush here. I worked the shadow over to here. Now look at these parts that I went around. I misted the paper a little bit, and I went around some of those dappled shadows that I had placed in the first wash. And now that I'm over to this stone wall with the shadow color, I want to continue up onto the wall and connect it right into this shape. So I'm using some raw sienna, some raw umber, and I'm continuing up into here and trying to find connections wherever I can. So into the shadow of the barn, some of the same mixture. And I wanted to get stronger and drop in some of the darks while this was damp with the middle value. And I'm negatively painting around some of those posts to suggest the structure of the barn. And again, negative painting is when you're painting around something to define it. So in the first wash, we laid in the colors for this, and then we're negatively painting around them now to leave that color behind. That's what negative painting is. All right, things are starting to come together. I'm working my way through here. Again, I painted around this bush or these flowers here because I wanted to preserve that. And now this is still damp, and I'm moving into this tree, and I'm using my calligraphy brush again, and I have raw umber, neutral tint, a darker, deeper brown color for the tree. And I'm getting into some of the work with the branches. And also, the tree value was similar to some of the value on top of the fence line. So where you can see those value connections, paint them. See how I don't have a separation between this color and this color? It's not intuitive to paint that way, but it brings a connectivity and a wholeness to your painting that is missing if you're just painting separate little shapes all over the scene. All right, I'm into some of the dry brush in detail with this tree here, and I'm still using my calligraphy brush, working my way through, and it's time to really get into some of the darks and the details. You know, I have some thicker paint on my brush, and we got the big shape, and now I'm thinking about the bits of dark and separation in areas that need more order and contrast. So I want the light on this building to stand out. So I'm going back here with my calligraphy brush, and I'm adding in some of these trees in the darker shadow areas to give me some contrast right down here in this important area of my painting. See how the light is really starting to come alive here? That's really what I get excited about. And I'm into some more detail. I'm using this Escoda size 12 Perla brush. That's good for dry brush and little details. It's about the smallest brush I use other than like a rigger brush or something like that. Okay, we're getting into some real detail here. So the middle value of the shadow is in place. Now I wanted to get some of the texture of the stone. This is a really old stone wall. I wanted to show some of that, and I'm carefully putting some marks and some darks and shapes there to create that impression. And I felt like I needed some more value here on the barn. What I had painted had dried and faded a little bit, and I know I want some more contrast. And we're getting close here. The roof of the barn, you can see it's an old rusted metal roof. It needs some texture. And I always talk about using your scrap paper. I have just a little bit of paint, a little bit of water on the brush so I can dry brush. Now, you don't need to practice these fine marks on your painting that you've spent all this time working on. Pull up a piece of scrap paper, make sure that your mark is right, then go and make your mark on your painting. That makes a big difference. And now we're ready to polish up the figures a bit. One thing that's great to do that adds some sophistication and elegance to your work. In the first wash, lay in some colors, lay in some light colors for a figure's clothing. In your second wash, lay in a darker version of that same color. You get this great shadow side, light side effect on your figures, and it really brings some complexity and some finish to your painting. And for the legs, I like to do a little dry brush. That shows some movement on the figure. And when we do really strong lines that are not as broken, it just doesn't look as good. So quick little dry brush marks for legs seem to work pretty well to show figures in motion. And finishing this up here, adding a little more skin tone and some definition and some shadows to the figures. And I'm not afraid to use a little bit of gouache and get some of those highlights. And I'm going back in with a rigger brush, polishing up the tree, getting some little marks here and little marks here, really putting in the finishing touches. And I want to show you this. I talk about this a lot too, getting a nice directional line leading into your scene. Now, you don't want to just make up lines all the time where they're not appropriate, but when you have a road or a path or something like this, a little directional line, a little edge of the road lines, things like that, some dry brush marks, those make a really big difference in pulling the viewer's eye into the scene. So watch when I add this mark in here. See those little lines leading you into the scene? I think they make a big difference. And here we are. There's a look at the final painting. I hope this gives you a better idea on how to take on the light in your subject. And by taking your time and working through the scene methodically, you can have vibrant light in your paintings. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? You ever had that experience? Well, I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone, you could print it out, and you can take a look at these crucial planning steps before you start each painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.